Hello and welcome to Today in the News on Vanguard Live. My name is Damola Ogunshaki. Let's move straight to the front pages of the dailies. I'm starting with Vanguard. Vanguard is leading with federal government incurs a 36.8 trillion naira deficit in 8 years under Buhari. Records 32 trillion naira revenue, spends 68 trillion naira. 77% of deficit incurred in 4 years. That can be seen on page 19. And here we have a photo story with the writer that says Governor of Sokoto State, Honorable Aminu Tambua, former Governor of Cross River State, Dr. Donald Duke, the 72nd Governor of Virginia, United States, that's Mr. Terry. Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, Governor of Oyo State, Engineer Sheyi Makinde, and immediate past Governor of Ekiti State, Dr. Kayode Fayemi, and Lagos State Governor, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, during the Nigeria Governors Forum (NGF) 2023 induction program for governors at the Presidential Banquet Hall, State House, Abuja, yesterday. Now, moving on page 6, we have 4 United States Embassy staff killed in Anambra. Embassy staff came under attack by gunmen in Ogbaru area of Anambra. On page 7, assault, court orders Seun Kuti's detention. And on page 16, Ahmed is saying that the survival of our political system or even the nation is substantial contingent on how we resolve current election disputes and run the next administrations in a manner that suggests that the struggle for power to govern was to install the rule of law and serve the public. Afe Babalola says it is clear that the issues bordering on general policies of government, such as whether or not to remove the petroleum subsidies, are not matter connected with the employment terms of staffs in the universities and therefore should not constitute grounds for embarking on strikes. You can see that story on page 15. And on sports, Manchester City versus Real Madrid, Guardiola, we need to play better to beat Real. You can see that on page 30. Now, stories above on page 12. Emefiele's Naira redesign curb terrorism, RYU tell Matawali. On page 8, Buhari baffled by pervasive level of corruption that's coming from the presidency. 10th National Assembly, come early, avoid Saraki like coup, Adamu tells Akpabio and Barrow others. Lastly, on the front page of Vanguard, federal government establishes 13 metropolitan fire station across Nigeria. You can see that story on page 25 of Vanguard newspaper. Now, away from there, we move to the Punch newspaper. The Punch is leading with strike. Dr. Shun talks medical terrorism gulps $3 billion in 3 years. Resident doctors reject Ngige's peace move, decry health sector's brain drain. And here we have 3 photo story with the writer that says Army rewards 58 soldiers with bicycles and cash gifts. Manufacturers threaten shutdown over exercise duty hike. That can be seen on page 20. Court remands Seun Kuti, police come home for exhibit. You can see that on page 12. Anambra, gunmen killed 2 United States consulate officials and 2 cops. Stories above, National Assembly leadership, APC wants Akpabio Abbas against upset. Lastly, on the Punch newspaper, strengthening anti-graft agencies, federal government advises Tinubu. Now let's move away from that and go to the nation. The nation is leading with what Tinubu should do on security by Inspector General, DSS and NSA. Soludo Uzodinma canvass state police synergy. Sanwo-Olu governors must be assembled. The measures, youth engagement, security architecture rejig, enhanced funding, non-kinetic approach. You can see that story on page 4. Poll petition, INEC, President-elect opposed live telecast. Tariff raise threatens manufacturing business. Man warns. You can see that on page 4. Buhari returns from London. That can be seen on page 6. Many killed in plateau attack. Firm increases commercial paper target to 20 billion naira. Stories above, why Hilda Bassi is yet to get World Guinness Record certification. That can be seen on page 22. And lastly, on the Nation newspaper, aircraft registration rose from 175 to 358. That can be seen on page 5. Away from that, we move to The Guardian. The Guardian newspaper is leading with World Hypertension Day. Pressure, lifestyle increase IBP among Nigerian youths. That can be seen on page 6. Treatment cost 1.22 trillion naira monthly for 76.2 million Nigerians living with ailments. May 29, Tinubu's inauguration sacrosanct, says Afenifere, as Ohaneze disowned plan to participate. That can be seen on page 6. Yari Cakes Akpabio leads over 40 senators to parley with NWC. That can be seen on page 3. Resident doctors begin warning strike today, sets May 29 deadline for federal government intervention. Lastly, on the Guardian newspaper, multiple challenges cripple primary healthcare nationwide. That can be seen on page 4 of the Guardian newspaper. And that's all we have on the front pages this morning. Join us after the break for the analysis. Welcome back. If you are just joining me, this is Today in the News from Vanguard Live. My name is Dablola Ogunshaki. Let's move straight to the papers. And we're starting with the federal government has incurred a deficit spending of 36.8 trillion naira in 8 years under the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari from 2015 to 2022. Vanguard analysis of data from the Central Bank of Nigeria (CBN) on federal government finances from 2015 to 2022 revealed that 77% of the deficit spending occurred in the last 4 years from 2019 to 2022. The data revealed that total revenue for the 8 years stood at 32.05 trillion naira, while total expenditure during the period stood at 68.8 trillion naira, indicating deficit spending of 36.8 trillion naira. In the first 4 years, 2015 to 2018, the government recorded 13.9 trillion naira as revenue, but spent 24.3 trillion naira, resulting in deficit spending of 10.4 trillion naira. However, the deficit spending jumped by 60% in the last 4 years, 2019 to 2022. Compared to the previous 4 years, revenue rose by 31% to 18.2 trillion naira, while expenditure rose by 83% to 44.5 trillion naira. Consequently, deficit spending rose to 26.4 trillion naira, translating to 60% increase when compared with the previous 4 years. Further analysis showed that over 22% of the 8 year deficit spending was incurred in 2022 alone. During the year, the federal government's revenue grew by 14.7% to 5.05 trillion naira from 4.4 trillion naira in 2021, while expenditure stood at 13.4 trillion naira in 2022, up by 14.5% from 11.7 trillion naira in 2021. As a result, the government incurred 8.3 trillion naira as deficit spending, representing a 13.6% increase from 7.3 trillion in 2021. Now, a major factor behind the spike in deficit spending is the steady and sharp increase in fuel subsidy spending, which stood at 9.34 trillion naira in the 8 years from 2015 to 2022. Vanguard analysis revealed that annual fuel subsidy spending shot up by 571% to 4.39 trillion naira in 2022 from 654 trillion naira in 2015. Now, there debt rises 267%. Now, given that 36.8 trillion deficit incurred in the 8 years period was financed by borrowing, total debt stock, according to data from the Debt Management Office (DMO), rose sharply by 267% or 33.65 trillion naira to 46.25 trillion naira in 2022 from 12.6 trillion naira in 2015. This excludes the 23 trillion naira borrowed from CBN as ways and means. But according to the World Bank, the rise in deficit spending as well as the huge debt stock will worsen except the government goes ahead with the proposed removal of fuel subsidy, even as it recommended other measures to strengthen the economy. And that's what we're going to talk on that. Now, to get more of that, of course, you can get a copy of Vanguard newspaper or visit our website. Now, let's move away from that and talk about this one. The presidency yesterday said that President Muhammadu Buhari was baffled by the high-level corruption still prevalent in the country, despite efforts made by his government to fight the malaise. It, however, noted that the president was above scandal and had no accounts with corrupt money anywhere in the world. A special assistant to the president on media and publicity, Garba Shehu, who stated this in an interview yesterday, said that if you ask this president the question why corruption is still rife in the country, that he will equally tell them that he was baffled by the fact that people who are otherwise would have been in jail are riding their Rolls Royce and their aircraft roaming around. He further explained that under the constitution, the president or the executive arm could only investigate and prosecute suspected corrupt persons. However, I said that the moment the president or the executive arm takes these cases to court, that his job is done, and it is up to the court to determine whether one is guilty or not. According to him, the Buhari administration, the highest officials in the nation's the parliament and judiciary have been prosecuted on corruption-related matters. Speaking further, the presidential scribe said that as a spokesperson, he goes to bed, sleep soundly convinced that nobody, whether from Nigeria or outside the country, can tell him to say he has discovered that they've discovered bank accounts and their boss had huge million. That's not the president. He's well above scandal, and that is how it will end. Buhari 80 we end this two-term tenure of 8 years in less than 2 weeks when the president-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu is expected to be sworn in. It will be recalled, however, that under Buhari's watch, Nigeria fell from 154 out of 180 countries and territories in the latest ranking of the 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index released by Transparency International in January 2023. So, of course, that's bringing the question, where is the president leaving the country when he hands over? Now, let's move away from that and talk about the medical doctors. Now, Nigeria spent about 3 billion naira on foreign healthcare related surveys from 2020 to 2022. That's according to reports. The total spending for the period under review was obtained from the balance of payments database of the Central Bank of Nigeria. And this came to the fore on Tuesday as the Nigerian Association of Resident Doctors insisted on starting a warning strike on Wednesday. Now, the doctors are starting this strike despite the fact that the federal government said it had begun talks with the parent body, the Nigerian Medical Association, as doctors cited poor health infrastructure as one of the reasons for the strike. And according to observation, Nigeria spent a total of $7.7 billion on overseas treatment between 2016 and 2022. The least bill for medical tourism was in 2016 about $17 million, while the highest was spent in 2019, $2.56 billion, and about $783.77 million was spent in 2017, while about $1.67 billion was spent in 2018. Now, the data further show that over $1 billion, 6.15.03 million and $434.43 million was spent in 2020, 2021, and 2022, respectively. And of course, that is really still a lot. So the doctors are starting their strike today, and we hope the federal government will be able to answer them as they've given May 29. Now, let's move away from that and talk about Seun Kuti. And Seun Kuti, the Lagos State Police Command has secured a court injunction to extend the detention of the Afrobeat singer for another 48 hours. Kuti will be in police detention for another 48 hours pending legal advice from the Directorate of Public Prosecutions. The police, it was gathered, approached a magistrate court with an expertise to extend the detention of Kuti for additional 21 days to complete its investigations. And let's move away from that and end this with Mr. and Mrs. this morning. And the first person talking is Mr. Mr. says, I married you when I was 30. Now I'm 60. Wow, how time flies. That means I have given 30 years of my life to you. And Mrs. replied, you are free to keep the rest. Mrs., what are you saying? What are you implying? And this is where we have to draw the curtain today. My name is Damlola Obushakin. Do well to like and follow us on all our social media platforms showing on your screen on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Our WhatsApp number is also displayed on your screen. Have a lovely one.